You're now watching Sports Bettors Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.
All right, Jimmy Ott with Paul Stone here talking college football. Paul, let's get right into it. Let's start at the top, the defending national champions. A lot of turnover, personnel, coaching, the whole shebang. So Michigan to make or not make the playoff is one that you're looking for. The defending national champion Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Jimmy, first of all, the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines are certainly a team in transition, to put it mildly. They lose their quirky head coach, Jim Harbaugh, to the NFL. They've got a record, I think, 13 players selected in the NFL draft. That includes J.J. McCarthy, their quarterback, who was the 10th overall selection in the draft this past April. They don't have a proven commodity at quarterback. They have as many as 5 candidates apparently competing for that job. And now on top of that, we're getting news that the NCAA is investigating the Michigan Wolverines, and first-time head coach Sharon Moore. As part of that investigation, there could be some action taken. There could be some suspensions, those types of things. So things could really get off the rails, I think, here at Michigan. They've got several games that kind of, when you're looking at them making the playoffs, I think if they lose 3 games, I don't think Michigan's going to be in. I think the Big Ten's getting 3 teams in the playoff. I think 2 of those probably going to be Ohio State and Oregon. But you look at this Michigan team, they've got home games against Texas and Oregon. Then they've got the road trip at Ohio State at the end of the regular season. I don't think they're winning any of those games, Jimmy. So I don't think this Michigan team, I think it could get really nasty there in Ann Arbor. I like Michigan not to make the playoffs at minus 139 there at Bet Rivers.
A great program. There's no doubt about it. I'll even throw in an angle about the championship hangover. It's real. These kids have been treated. I mean, it's the banquet tour. It's the BMOC. I mean, everybody's telling them how good they are. It's just that lack of hunger. Even Nick Saban, after he won his first national championship at LSU in 2003, after 2004, he said, it's real. It's another rat poison, if you will. So speaking of the Crimson Tide, the former Crimson Tide coach, now media member. Don't forget your credential when you go to media days, coach. But the one of the cool things about the Bet Rivers college football menu on the futures is the team specials and the most regular season wins. Right at the top is Alabama versus Michigan, sort of a rematch of the semifinal game, the overtime game last year. So, Paul, you think that Alabama, even with their considerable, transition, I mean, life after Saban, here we go, and DeBoer lost a lot on his roster, then he recaptured a lot and added to his roster. So it's a lot of new faces. Alabama, you like them to have more wins than Michigan at minus 118.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama, first of all, they play a more difficult schedule. I did mention Michigan's in the previous breakdown, their tough games against Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. But Alabama has 5 games that are probably going to feature a single-digit point spread, those being games at Wisconsin, home game against Georgia, at Tennessee, at LSU, and at Oklahoma. So they do play the more difficult schedule. But again, I'm just really concerned about this Michigan team. And you mentioned an extra component of it, the fact that they perhaps have a little bit of that national championship hangover. It's hard to be as hungry when you've reached the mountaintop, especially in that next season. And they're just going to I think they're going to be just facing a lot of adversity throughout the season. Alabama, as you mentioned, Kalen DeBoer initially when he's hired, Caleb Downs goes to Ohio State, the great freshman safety, and they lose some other guys. But he was able to stop the bleeding. He was able to get the offensive tackle Proctor back from Iowa, a few things like that. So this roster, I think Alabama, I've got them number 6 in my power ratings. I don't think they're going to drop off the face of the earth. And I think at worst here, we're going to get a push. So I think Alabama, though, probably a 10-win team. I've got them making the playoffs. So I like Alabama at minus 118 to post more regular season wins than Michigan.
All right, let's move on to a team that I like. And I know this has been a fashionable team as of late, and that is they were just waiting for this historical program to recapture its past, and it just hasn't. But I think you think Nebraska's a tough job. Well, how about Temple? How about Baylor in the situation that Matt Rule took over? And so in year 2, I know that Matt Rule is going to have this team on the improve. Same old for Matt Rule at Nebraska in year 1 because it was the close losses, the tough losses. 5 of the 7 losses were one-score losses. 4 of those 5 were by 3 points. So that should sort of correct itself a little bit. So I returned 17 starters. He does bring in a big-time quarterback. In the recruiting cycle. They should be favored in their first 7 games as I look at this schedule. And so I like Nebraska to go over 4.5 conference wins. Why not over 7.5? Well, you do the math. There's only 3 non-conference games, and so you get a no-sweat start with UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa. They lost to Colorado last year. I think they'll win, but you don't have to sweat it, and you're paying 28 cents less juice, minus 134 on the over 4.5 conference wins as opposed to over 7.5 total wins at Bet Rivers. So, and what's happening there is people are just betting the traditional win total overs, and so you get a lot more handle there, and this one is getting less. And Paul, you've done this enough. The lighter bet ones are the ones that you could get more value, and that's what's happening right there. Also, Nebraska more wins than Oklahoma this year. Sorry, Paul, but your UT boys, we're kissing their butts to start. Welcome to the SEC. Here's SEC Media Days in Dallas. Here is the lighter schedule. I've projected the top 8 and the bottom 8 in the SEC. And, well, Oklahoma and Texas play each other, but after that, Texas plays one top 8 team. That'd be Georgia, and Oklahoma gets the rest, 6 of the 7. So lopsided schedule. I know you'll agree with that too. I know you look at those schedules, but that's why I think that Oklahoma's going to have a tough transition, much tougher than the Texas Longhorns in their initial season in the SEC. So Nebraska more wins than Oklahoma at plus money at Bet Rivers, plus 105. And why not? I got them right around that 9 win, so why not go with 9 wins? Exactly 9 wins at Bet Rivers is plus 600 as well. So Nebraska over 4.5 conference wins, more wins than Oklahoma, plus 105, exactly 9 wins at plus 600. So, and Paul, the schedule is one thing you got to look for with this major transformation, because I'm looking at, teams in the East, like Georgia had a really light schedule. That schedule's going way up from last year. Ole Miss doesn't have quite as tough a schedule, in the SEC West. And what divisions have been more lopsided than the Big Ten East and West? And I've looked at those as well. So Nebraska there. Paul, you like Ohio State as we move on. And, you talk about pressure. They put their money where their mouth is. Boy, they went out and said, all right, what do you need? We're tired of losing to Michigan. We're tired of not getting this thing done. We are going to load up in the transfer portal, and they did in a big way.
Yeah, Ohio State, you look at that roster, Jimmy, obviously they have a quarterback question. They got Will Howard out of the transfer portal from Kansas State. Will Howard's had an interception problem, so he's gonna have great personnel around him there with the Buckeyes, but he's got to take care of the football a little bit better. And even though Howard is likely to be their season opening starter when they face Akron on August 31st, I'm not counting out true freshman Julian Sayin. I think he signed with Alabama initially, but when Saban retired, switches allegiances and goes to Ohio State, I think there's a possibility he's going to get an opportunity, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's their quarterback. And some other guys in the program. Devin Brown's been in the program a while. Aaron Nolan, they've recruited very well, obviously, at the quarterback position. So I think it's going to work itself out. You look, and this might not be a popular statement with some, and many might disagree, but if you remove the quarterback position, and I'm not saying you can because that's the most important position in all of sports, but at the other 21 positions, Ohio State's got a better roster than Georgia. They have got guys all over the place that are NFL guys. They are just totally ramped up. You look at, they had 4 guys who were potential top 50 picks in the NFL draft this past April who decided to come back. The wide receiver, Ibuka, the running back, Travion Henderson, the defensive end, Tuamalawa. That was pretty close on the pronunciation. And then cornerback, Denzel Burke. So they have those 4 guys that were projected as possible top 50 guys. They returned to Columbus. as do left guard Donovan Jackson, who's been a two-time All-Big Ten selection, and defensive end Jack Sawyer. Those are guys who just decided to come back for another year and another shot at that national title. And then you look at the fortification of their roster through additions like Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, who gained more than 2,700 rushing yards in his first two seasons. He and Henderson are going to be a pretty good running back tandem. And then Caleb Downs coming over from Alabama as a true freshman there for the Crimson Tide, had 107 tackles. So those are big-time additions. I just really like this Ohio State team. You look at this particular bet, Ohio State minus 195 over Texas to record more regular season wins. You know, Texas has got what I would call 4 losable games. Week 2, you know, they're only favored by 3. They're at Bet Rivers at Michigan. Then on October 12th against Oklahoma, most game of the year markets have the Longhorns as about an 8-point favorite. On October 19th at home against Georgia. Currently Georgia favored by 2.5 over the Longhorns there at Bet Rivers. And then the season-ending game against Texas A&M, the first time those teams have played since 2011. Kyle Field's going to be rocking the Longhorns about a 4.5 or a 5-point favorite. I think the Longhorns are losing at least 2 games. Look at Ohio State. They're really the only 2 games they have that won't feature a double-digit point spread. That game against Oregon on the road on October 12th, currently getting 2.5 points from the Ducks there in Eugene. And then on November 2nd, traveling to Happy Valley, currently about a 5-point favorite over Penn State in game of the year markets there. So I think at the best case scenario from Texas's perspective, this is a push, and both teams have 2 losses. But I could see Texas certainly having 2. I expect Texas is going to have at least 2 losses. Could have more in their first year in the SEC, even though they did get that extremely favorable first-year conference schedule. But I really like this Ohio State team, and minus 195 is pretty high price, but I like them at minus 195 to have more regular season wins than Texas.
Buckeyes are loaded. No ifs, ands, and buts about it, and nobody was as aggressive as they were in the transfer portal in the offseason. They've got a lot of resources in Columbus, and they are, we talk about hunger, a lack of hunger maybe in Ann Arbor this year. No lack of hunger in Columbus, Ohio for the Ohio State Buckeyes. You know, as we look at, so one of my angles in trying to, with the schedule transformation, and we look in with the Big Ten, the West was so weak, and so I looked at teams that maybe were going to escalate there, and then I looked in the East and saw some teams, the non-Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State teams, that would get, you know, a lighter schedule. And the first of those 2, and I got one from each conference. And first of all, Purdue on the West side. They've got, and I put the Big 4, and I'm looking at Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and then Oregon. I got 2. We could talk about maybe USC and Iowa, but I think there's a drop after that Big 4. They play 3 of those Big 4 in Purdue. They play Oregon, Penn State, in Ohio State. They also play Notre Dame. I know that Notre Dame lost their offensive tackle, but Notre Dame should be able to handle the Boilermakers. You also got a sneaky little. Nobody was bruised up, short term and long term, like Wazoo and Oregon State. But they got to go to Oregon State, and they held on to a few more players than maybe it's expected. Maybe Purdue's power ranking is a little bit, but that's always been a tricky trip to the state of Oregon for historical Big Ten teams. So Purdue at at under 4, plus 115 right now. So. And also, they sandwich the game at Oregon State between Notre Dame and Nebraska, which makes it a little bit more tricky. And so I think that the Purdue Boilermakers, and then at the end of the season, they end up with trips to East Lansing and Bloomington. Not exactly Murderer's Row, but after they get through this entire schedule, a much tougher schedule than what they've been dealing with lately. I think their depth is going to take a role as well. Under 4 wins, total wins, Purdue at plus 115. I know it's a low number, but they've got a big step up in class as far as their schedule is concerned. Paul, I know you've looked at the schedules as well, in college football with, all this shifting in conference realignment.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at these regular season win totals and these conference win totals, I mean, it all comes down to scheduling, not only who you play and where you play them, but the point of occurrence, like you mentioned, in certain sandwich situations and things like that. And Purdue definitely, they lost their head coach. Brom goes to Louisville. And, I just don't think it's quite the same program. They've been losers in the transfer portal, I think, the last couple of years. Their top wide receiver goes to Oklahoma. Their top defensive player, Skyerton, returns to Bryan College Station, where he grew up, to play for Texas A&M this year, and I think he'll be a force in the SEC. So they lose their best offensive player, their best defensive player, and I just think, in this new age of college football, the rich will get richer, and the other teams will suffer. And not only talking about the other teams being group of 5 schools, but the lower division schools in the Power 4 conferences, rather, I think are also going to see some decreases in their overall roster talent. And I think Purdue's a prime example of that.
All right, let's get to you next when you get a couple of unders here in the Big Ten. Let's start off with the Indiana Hoosiers. And speaking of new coaches there, relatively new coaches, and the Hoosiers number right now at Bet Rivers is 6. You like the under 6 minus 125.
Yeah, Kirk Cignetti comes over from James Madison, where he had a lot of success last year. Got the game day crew there from ESPN. I think they lost that game to Appalachian State, but he really elevated that program, and so he gets swooped up by Indiana. A lot of enthusiasm surrounding Indiana's football program. Cignetti is a guy who brings a lot of energy, a lot of passion. He's doing really well in talking time. But the thing about talking time is it's about 9 months, 8 months. We're about to get to playing time, so there's going to start being some results. Predictably, Cignetti dipped heavily into the transfer portal. He brought at least 10 players with him from James Madison. He also added a veteran dual-threat quarterback, their likely starting quarterback in Curtis Rourke, who comes over from Ohio University of the Mid-American Conference. And even though the Hoosiers open with 3 layups in non-conference against FIU, Western Illinois, and Charlotte in the non-conference, so they're going to start at 3-0. For me, it just comes down to the fact the Big Ten isn't the Sun Belt, nor is it the Mid-American Conference. So he's got a roster full of a lot of transfer guys through the portal, but these guys are largely group of 5 guys. And as I like to say in college football, it's not always how you play, it's who you play. And they're playing, they're going to be stepping up in class. They're going to be playing a different caliber of competition. And outside of those almost certain 3 victories in non-conference, Indiana might just be favored in a single conference game this upcoming season. I've got them favored by around a field goal in the regular season finale at home against Purdue. They've got 4 other games that are winnable, those being home games against Nebraska and Washington, and road games at Northwestern and Michigan State. But I think they're probably going to split those games. I don't think they're going to, win all 3 of those, win 3 of the 4. So I like Indiana. I think they're going to be a 5-7 football team this year. I like them under 6 at minus 1.25 there at Bet Rivers.
How about this also? They play 4 teams coming off of byes. And I'd say, Nick Saban's never tired. After the 2009 National Championship, Alabama had to play 6 of their 8 conference games against teams coming off of byes. Now, they have 2. They come off 2, and Indiana comes off 2, but still they had two difference. That's the most games he's lost. He hadn't lost that many games in the regular season since 2010 ever. With the so it's a big deal. So Indiana, a lot of a step up in class for Cignetti, and it's good. The Hoosiers, they're excited. There's some optimism in Bloomington, but it's a tough schedule for them. Michigan State is another team. You talk about. Boy, they fixed everything with Tucker. They used the transfer portal and Walker, and they rode him to a New Year's Six bowl. But boy, they Jonathan Smith left left his alma mater at Oregon State, but he doesn't inherit a great deal. It's a great situation at East Lansing as well. You're looking more at the conference wins here of the 9 games. You had them under 2.5, which is minus 110 right now at Bet Rivers, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at these teams in the preseason, Jimmy, as you know, so much of the handicap is about that transfer portal. Michigan State had 38 guys leave through the portal reportedly, had 24 come in, and they lost some of their better players in the program in the portal. Lost maybe their top 2 defensive players, both defensive tackles. Simeon Barrow goes to Miami of Florida, and then Derek Harmon goes to Oregon. So it tells you about the caliber of programs that they're leaving for, the type of players they are. And Michigan State just doesn't have that many of those kind of guys. I was looking at a preseason publication magazine, and it listed top 4 teams, Big Ten, offense and defense, and it listed 12 players instead of 11. So if you're following me, there's 48 players on the first 4 teams on offense, 48 on defense, so a total of 96 players on the preseason 2024 all Big Ten team. Out of 96 players, Michigan State only has 1 on the offense or defense. And you got to have guys. You got to have playmakers. You can't just have a bunch of guys hold and serve at a position, as I like to say. You got to have some dudes or whatever you want to call them. Michigan State just lacks those kind of players right now, the difference makers. They do have Aiden Childs at quarterback, who follows Jonathan Smith from Corvallis to East Lansing. He took 91 snaps last year as a true freshman, though, so he's unproven. Even though he's talented, he's got some athleticism. The jury's certainly still out on Childs. You look at this conference schedule, since we're talking about under 2.5 conference wins, and I think they're going to start the league play at 0-5. They've got a really difficult conference schedule, especially at the beginning, and those first 5 games in conference being at Maryland, Ohio State at home, at Oregon, Iowa at home, and then at Michigan. So they're going to start 0-5 before they play Indiana, at Illinois, and then home games against Purdue and Rutgers. I think they might split those games and get 2 conference wins. I don't think they're winning 3 of those final 4. I don't think they're winning any of the first 5. So I like Michigan State under 2.5 conference wins there at Bet Rivers. And as a bonus, we get plus money at plus 110.
There you go. All right. So the Michigan State Spartans under 2.5 conference wins, minus 110 right now at Bet Rivers. We talked about the schedule and the Big Four in the Big Ten this year, and there's a drop off after that with Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon. There's one team in the Big Ten that doesn't play any of them. That would be Greg Schiano's and Tony Soprano's favorite team, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. This is by far the easiest schedule in the Big Ten. And they don't play Iowa, who I could listen to an argument between Iowa and USC, who's the 5th best team in the Big Ten entering on. I don't know what your opinion is on that, Paul, but I think that's pretty close. I mean, you talk about 2 totally different teams, one offensive-oriented and one defensive-oriented, to say the least. Iowa was the butt of a lot of jokes last year, but they won 10 games and had 11th stolen from them on the punt return against Minnesota. But the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, first thing about it, they got the best coach they've ever had in the history of their program in Greg Schiano. And so kind of a goofy deal with Tennessee where, I mean, Tennessee let the internet, our social media, decide that they didn't want them as their coach. He was not a great fit in the pros, but I tell you what, man, he is a very good college coach, and he knows this job. Yeah, things are changing, but he's got a little help over there. But the schedule is the biggest deal, and they were 6-6 last year, and they started out 6-2. But their depth caught up with them. They lost their last 4 regular season games, and then they beat Miami in the bowl game. The total this year is only 6.5. They have a better team. They have a great schedule. We're talking about one of those teams from the Big Ten East that all of a sudden doesn't have to play those 3 teams or Oregon. So, I mean, it all adds up. This is what my favorite play, and it's kind of down the path. Rutgers doesn't get a whole lot of attention when it comes to the Big Ten, especially this year with all the additions coming in from the Pac-12. But better team, their depth is improved greatly, so their roster's better, their team is better, their coach is another year in the continuity there. I mean, tell me what I'm missing here with Rutgers. So Rutgers avoids the Big Four and Iowa. I've got them over 6.5, minus 125. Now, I'll even lay a little bit more juice at minus 177 because one of their non-conference games, because it's minus 3.5 conference wins and over 6.5 total wins. One trip to Blacksburg, Virginia. And I think, Paul, if you've done Paul has done his homework, obviously. Virginia Tech's pretty good this year. They're not bad. So that game, they may be close to a double-digit underdog in that trip to Blacksburg. So I think it's worth adding. Split your bet, taking out some more juice at minus 177. So Rutgers over 6.5, minus 125. Over 3.5 conference wins, minus 177.
Yeah, I tell you the thing, I like, and you hit it on the nose. I mean, as we've talked about before, the schedule is just, to me, it's the most critical component of handicapping these regular season win totals and these conference win totals. And Rutgers has that certainly in their corner. The one thing I'm concerned about Rutgers is obviously they've been more of a defensive-minded football team than an offensive-minded team. And really the one playmaker they had last year on offense was their quarterback, Gavin Wimsatt. And he was, basically pointed towards the door and told that they were going to a more, dynamic.
Yeah, they're bringing a transfer from Michigan State, yeah.
And their presumptive starter is going to be, I think, the guy from Minnesota.
I'm sorry, Minnesota. Yes, I'm sorry.
Minnesota, the Greek rifle. I won't try to butcher his last name, but he's his passing statistics, and I know at Minnesota he didn't have the Ohio State Buckeye receiver room, but his passing statistics are not very good. So I'm concerned about the offensive prowess there for Rutgers, but certainly. It's over or nothing with Rutgers because it's all about that schedule. And like you said, Schiano, a great coach. They've got an above-average defense, and, things are set up well for them. But I think it's going to come down to that quarterback position. They're going to have to get a little bit more production out of the young man who transfers in from Minnesota.
Can't get much less. So that's my thing on that. I mean, they've really just their run-pass ratio was lopsided because they still went 6-6 last year with very little balance in their offensive attack. Well, Paul, we talked about Michigan having a big turnover. Not as much as the team they played in the national championship game, the Washington Huskies. I mean, 21 of those 22 stars gone. I mean, Fish is a really good coach. I mean, minor miracles at Arizona, but man, he's got the turnover. Listen, I know it's college football with the turnover is king, but my goodness, what do you think about the Washington Huskies this year?
I'll tell you, it's just, again, this is just the epitome of today's college football. Like you said, 21 of the guys who started at the 22 starting positions on offense and defense for Washington in that national championship loss to Michigan, no longer on the roster. And I mean, this team, it's just a different team. I mean, I'm assuming they're going to be wearing purple jerseys and gold helmets, but other than that, it's not the same guys filling those uniforms. So, what a difference 7 months makes for the Washington Huskies. There's just virtually no resemblance from this year's team to last year's team. They had 10 players drafted in the NFL draft this past April. 3 of those guys were first-rounders. And of those first-rounders, 2 were taken in the top 10, those being Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback, and standout wide receiver Rome Odunze. The offensive line last year, I mean, we could go through each unit and talk about the losses, but the offensive line, they won the Joe Moore Award last year, right, symbolic of the most outstanding line in all of college football. The guys that they have coming back in that offensive line room right now as they begin practices have a collective total of 2 starts at the FBS level. So they're going from the best offensive line in college football to guys who've never played any FBS footballs. It's just incredible, You look at their September schedule, certainly gives them the opportunity to possibly even start out 5-0. I'm predicting a 4-1 start for the Huskies, and then they really get into a difficult non-conference schedule rather after that. I've got them from October on. They might only be favored in 2 more games, those being at Indiana and a home game against UCLA. But this is just, again, it's what we're facing as far as how teams' roster can turn over so significantly from year to year in college football. My power rating for Washington, I'll end with this. From last year's national championship game to this season opener, I've reduced their power rating by 20 points. And I think it's appropriate. They're just a totally different team. It's a totally different program, totally different players. I think this is a 500 team at best. So I like Washington under 6.5 at -143 there at Bet Rivers.
And the last two teams we talked about that game, if I've got it going 4-0 also, and I like the under also, going coast to coast to Piscataway, New Jersey, to take on the Rutgers Scarlet Knights in that Game 5. Might be getting a more favorable number at that point as well. Tons to talk about in college football. We'll be doing it, previewing all the conferences from a handicapping perspective, and also throughout the season, giving our top picks each and every week. For Paul Stone, I'm Jimmy Ott here on the Sports Bettors Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.